Our next speaker is Director Fernando Gentilini. Gentilini is the director of for what is called Western Europe, Western Balkans, and Turkey of the Europe External Action Service. And before joining the EEAS, Gentilini was an Italian diplomat. He also served as a NATO special envoy to Afghanistan and EU special representative to Kosovo. Gentilini has a degree in law, and today he will share with us some reflections on European foreign policy and the ambitions and capacities in an age of a European crisis, if there is a crisis after the very optimistic views from our Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Many thanks. First of all, to the Institute for having invited me here. It's a great pleasure to be here. I listened very carefully to your introductory remarks at the beginning, and I feel much more comfortable now to take the floor after the Minister, because I really liked what he said, and I think he put things on the right path, in my view. While listening, I was thinking that maybe the first thing I wanted to say is that Europe went into, let's call it, crisis many times in history. But if there is one basic rule in the European history, let's say, is that every time it was able to get out and much stronger than before. I think this is a fact, looking at history, and the Minister made some very pertinent examples on that. The other thing, it was coming to my mind listening to him, because he mentioned the Balkans, he mentioned the enlargement, is that another constant path in European history is that Europe keeps its promise. I think this is very important. As you said, I'm dealing with various areas, but particularly I'm dealing with enlargement. I think this is a very important message all the time to be reminded. The question on whether is integration in crisis, I think this is the right question, honestly. Actually, I would put idea instead of integration. Is the idea in crisis? I really don't think so. I mean, look around the world, look around what's happening all over the places, and tell me whether the EU idea, which is an idea based on values, which is an idea based on peace, and tell me if this idea is in crisis. I really don't believe so. So I think my contribution today would be to try to say that despite all what has been discussed and what is being discussed about the Eurozone and all that, despite all this, there are many things happening in Brussels. And there are many things happening, and my angle is foreign policy. So my ambition, let's say, is to try and say that we have a lot of things happening. We have a big project being implemented in foreign policy. And I will stay very much on these two words, which are in the title of my presentation, ambition, capacities, and try to give you. I also wanted to say at the beginning that, of course, there is a very strong and long-standing bond between the EU and Norway. This has been said. We work very closely on many things, have close ties, and I agree. I think you wrote it, outside, inside. Yes, I think Norway is inside and it's outside at the same time. I think it's a good way to say it, but very strong. Very reliable partner, and we value this cooperation very much. Why? Because I think, I mentioned the idea before, I think we share the values. We share the same values: democracy, human rights, social justice, the rule of the law. I think when you share those kind of values, then cooperation is really possible, and there are good bases to work together, be it peacekeeping, human rights, development cooperation, climate change. I really wanted to say this at the beginning because EU-Norway is a relation that we value very, very, very much. So I'll try to give the point of view of an official, someone you you very kindly mentioned some of my past experiences, someone who has been very much dealing with multilateral structure. I am an Italian diplomat. I come from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I still belong to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But my experience has been more within the EU, within NATO. I work also with the UN, so in this multilateral context, which means that we work on the basis of common denominator, not on the basis of positions, but on common denominator, which makes, in my view, life much more interesting. Complex, maybe, but much more interesting. So I really, very honestly and speaking very frankly, will try to tell you how I see things, how I see this project taking off on foreign policies, this external action service, which is the result of Lisbon. And again, I really like the way the minister put it, digesting. Yes, I think we are digesting. We are digesting a lot of things. We are a very new service in many ways, 1.5 years. But still, I think, and I'll try to show this, there are a lot of elements which makes me think that we are on the right track, talking about foreign policy. Every presentation about foreign policy in these days starts with the world is changing. Yes, it's changing, it's very dynamic. I'm not going to elaborate on this because we all know, I see a lot of political analysts here, everybody knows this better than me. I think it's changing everything, policy, diplomacy, economy, but it's also the media which is changing, the technology. So this is. So my point is that I think there is one important thing that I want to say about these changes. And this is, and I'm saying this because it's very relevant for the project of foreign policy we are trying to put in place. And this is that dichotomies of the past, like internal, external, national, supranational, international, global, local, they have lost much of the meaning today. Actually, I think they really have lost their meaning. And the same can be said for the traditional way policy and diplomacy respond. This is also changing. We mentioned diplomatic services. Member states are also changing. They, of course, remain an important actor in foreign policy, but they are not the only actor anymore. There are actually many, many others in the international scene, from international organizations, again, media, group of people, NGOs, even individuals. See what happened if something wrong goes on YouTube, and then you understand how individuals can really shape things in this day. So I think this is an important point, because the project we have it's a very special one. It's a very unique one. This external action service, European external, it's a very unique creature. By the way, this adventure of foreign policy in the EU has not started now with the EEAS. This has started much before. I had been working with the previous High Representative many years. And I think if we look at the last 10, 15 years, we see a lot of remarkable achievements when it comes of aiming a much more coordinated foreign policy in Brussels. I said we are a special body. We are a sui generis body. Why? I think and this is very important to understand. I'm sorry but because I think this sophistication, I think, is our weak point. Trying to understand how complex things are, I think it's an effort that is required, and this is not easy. But we are less than a fully fledged diplomatic service. But I think at the same time we are more in the EEAS than a foreign ministry. And in fact, our structures combines different elements of the foreign ministry, but also elements of the defense ministry. I would say a few words about our security missions in the world, which I think explains this very well. To a certain extent, I think we also combine elements of a development ministry. So this makes our service quite sui generis. Our mission is to assist the High Representative, which is also Vice President of the Commission, according to the Lisbon Treaty, in her mandate, which means to help develop the common foreign policy, but also means to ensure coherence to the overall EU external action. You know that one of the main points of this Lisbon Treaty when it comes to foreign policy is that now the High Representative is the expression of the government, but at the same time is also the expression of the Commission, because it takes the place of a Vice President of the Commission. I think this is, but this is to say that we do not want to replace member states. That's not our job, to replace diplomatic national services. We don't want to replace the Commission, we don't want to replace the Council Secretariat. Actually, our composition, which is 1/3 of official from the member states, 1/3 from the Council, 1/3 of the Commission, suggests the opposite, that we want to integrate and complement these other actions. Our job every day is trying to forge a more consistent and effective EU presence on the international scene. Again, as the minister said, I think we are digesting here. It's not really much about speaking with one voice. It's more about helping to deliver a single and integrated European message, joined up government. I think this is, and this all explains the difficulties of the job. The minister mentioned before the work of Cathy Ashton in setting up the service, in establishing it. Now, after 1.5 years from its entry into force, I think we can count on a fully fledged HQ in Brussels, more than 140 delegations on the ground, which I think are one of our main assets. So to come back to the title of this presentation, the ambition of the Foreign Service, the Foreign External Action Service, the ambition is there, is very high. And to see it, I think one has to see what have been the, let's say, the main 3 priorities in the past period. Establishing the service, which is a new thing. It's creating something from scratch. Again, I want to highlight the fact that this is happening in the context we have described before. So there are additional challenges on this exercise. Looking at the neighborhood in a large sense, the Balkans, the Mediterranean, but also the Far East, the Eastern Europe, and trying to stabilize it, continue to stabilize it. I mentioned before the enlargement perspective, which I think is a very, very powerful tool that we are trying to use to achieve that. And then improving relations with the strategic partners, US, Russia, China, but others as well, major player now, India, Brazil, and so on. So, and on this, I think we have achieved something. We see some trends, we see some good results. Maybe a few examples, talking about, again, ambition. I mentioned the Balkans. Yes, this is a special area for us. It's now our neighborhood. We have this very powerful tool, which is the European perspective, which basically is a trade-off, reforms and perspective. They go together. In the last couple of years, that has been one of my main daily occupation. We have been facilitating this dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina, which is a dialogue on how to overcome some of the problems of the past. It's a dialogue to improve lives of the people living there. It's a dialogue to make cooperation easier. It's especially a dialogue to remove obstacles to the European integration of the region, and Kosovo is part of this region. We have also strengthened a lot our presence on the ground in the last year, particularly in difficult places. Our delegation in Bosnia, for instance, has been very much strengthened because you all know, I think, the complexity of the situation there and the difficulties to manage and help the political process there. In Pristina, we have done the same. Actually, this is interesting. Let's say the configuration of our delegations on the ground reflect very much the Lisbon Treaty, particularly in this important place, where you have somebody in charge. In this case, is an EU special representative. Then on one hand, represent the Council. On the other hand, is also head of the delegation, head of the office, and represent the Commission. So here you see the direct link between HQ and important places abroad, trying to use at the best all the various assets we have. But in the Middle East, there were achievements as well. I think I represented personal engagement as relaunched negotiation with Iran. And when it comes to the Mediterranean, I think the External Action Service, has helped shaping the response. I think time events will tell us whether this is the good response, or whether some more needs to be done. But I want just to say that here, this is an area where we are really working very closely and in network with member states. Because yes, I think that's what it is a network. That's what is the European External Action Service, an actor in the middle of other actors and trying to integrate things better. Africa is another area. We are trying to use all our assets in this comprehensive way, this comprehensive approach. Security, development, assistance, diplomacy, all goes together. And I think we also had some good results through a collective effort in dealing with this particular problem of the piracy in the past months. Compared with some years ago, incidents have declined really a lot. And in the last year, I think we have been focusing a lot on Asia as well. Actually, there have been a lot of activities in Asia, helping Burma, Myanmar transition to democracy, forging stronger links with partners like ASEAN. So I just wanted to give these few examples, which do not, but to say the ambition is there. The ambition is there and is very high. True. The current situation in the Eurozone cast a shadow. These are difficult days. And the minister was referring to the article of Thomas Gartonash. And he also made, besides the point on generation, the point that even in the most skeptical country, there is a basic understanding of the advantages of belonging to a single aggregate of 500 million people. It's not just a market. It's not just an economic or commercial aggregate. I think it's a project. It's an idea. It's much more than that. And in fact, I think we all believe that pooling our resources and means better together is the way forward. And this will have lasting effects on our EU overall positioning and role in the world. The same apply in foreign policy. The same apply to the EEAS. With time, all our different components will integrate more and more. With time, we will further improve our efficiency, effectiveness, and we will be able to improve the overall quality of delivery. Two more issues, which I think are very much guiding our daily work these days, and again are a witness of the level of our ambition. I think the first is that we need to find ways for the EU to bring all its assets together in a more comprehensive way. I mentioned Africa before, but I think this is when we act across the globe. We are in a unique position to do that. And it's not just about diplomacy, but it's about rule of law, development, economic support. And this is also, as I said at the very beginning, about promoting the European values when it comes to our external actions. We have just recently, and I think it was for the first time, that Cathy Ashton has appointed an EU Special Representative on Human Rights, just to mark this. So act more comprehensively, using all the assets we have. The second point, I think, on which we really want to work is to advance the EU work on these cross-cutting issues, such as energy and water security, climate change, education. mainstreaming of this issue into our actions and deeds is very important, because these issues in the future, and already now, but are going to be going to have a much stronger impact than simple foreign policy issues on the life of all of us, or on the life of all our citizens. The minister mentioned the Arctic. Yes, this is clearly something which epitomizes challenges and opportunities presented by a changing climate. And as you know, this is an area where EU and Norway have common interest and can cooperate, research and the rest. Few words about the other part of the presentation, about the capacities, because I think it's also, of course, very, very important. Again, I don't think we should not forget that in practical terms we are a relatively new service. On this, I've tried to put together 4 or 5 points, which in my view, as I said, I'm an official, I'm inside the structure, I see things happening. In my view, are elements which tells me, makes me believe we are doing the right thing, we are on the right track. Security provider. I think this is an important point. The EU has grown up as a peace builder in the past. We have seen this feature in the past decade. We currently deploy over 5,000 people in 15 missions and operations around the globe, from Kosovo to Afghanistan, Horn of Africa, Congo, Iraq, Middle East. We don't do this alone, but in partnership with others, international organizations, regional actors, partner countries. I just wanted to mention this because too often I think there is this idea that the EU is a soft power only. This is an important feature in developments in EU foreign policy, I think. Service provider. This is another thing I see every day. We pull our information together with member states because we are a network. And I am very encouraged to see that what we are facing is an increased number of requests from member states to provide them with our thoughts, our ideas, with a European line to take. Another thing is to see that many of our heads of delegation around the world are more and more involved in preparation of visits, high-level visits. Very often they are part of this national delegation when it comes to going to certain countries. I think this shows the added value in my view, and I think it's very important. I mentioned that we put together expertise and resources. I mentioned before the dialogue, Belgrade-Pristina. This is a very difficult exercise. We are focusing on a number of very technical issues. We discuss and we facilitate agreements on a number of issues in the past year, on freedom of movement, on freedom of goods, custom stamps, but also civil registry, cadastral, integrated border management, participation of Kosovo in regional cooperation. These are very specific issues, very technical, it requires a lot of expertise. I think we were in a unique position to mobilize resources from all over the places, not just within the Commission. And you know, the Commission is, you can find expertise on basically everything, but also from member states to get the best people in this particular area. Again, I think this is an opportunity that we just have ourselves, not many have. It's part of our unicity, it's part of our, let's say, competitive advantage compared with the national services. I should also mention continuity in the decision-making process in foreign affairs. Again, we enter here in this very complicated things, but basically, compared with the past, after Lisbon, now, when it comes to foreign policy, we have Cathy Ashton, the High Representative, chairing a meeting of the foreign ministers. This is very important. Before, you know the arrangement. It was this rotating presidency. Every 6 months, you change the chair, you change maybe the priorities, you change the... Now we have continuity, which in foreign policy I think is most important than anything else. And this is not only at the higher level, with the Cathy chairing a meeting with the minister, but also at working level. We chair our geographical working group. We have EEAS official chairing the work of the working group on foreign matters. We have an EEAS official chairing permanently the EU PSC, which is the Policy and Security Committee, which is the higher body in Brussels dealing with foreign policy, the one who advise the foreign ministers. So I think continuity in the decision making, in my view, is another thing which shows that we have the capacity to add something. Co-location, this is also another thing we are seeing around the world. More and more, we have places where member states get together sometimes with the EU offices. This is not just something we are forced to save money because of the situation, but I think improves also very much the effectiveness on what we do all together on the ground. Syria, for instance, provides an example of member states' diplomats being housed in the EU delegation, considering this is an extreme example. There will be others. There are others also, but I think it's important to mention, talking about capacity. I maybe should conclude by saying, repeating what I was saying at the beginning. Delivering an integrated message is very challenging. It means that you have to develop a joint agreed one. I mean, this is our daily work. And as long as foreign policy is ruled by consensus, because this is what it is, there will always be the possibility of national vetoes. And this, I think, is a part of our job, this should not lead to a foreign policy of the lowest common denominator. I said at the beginning, I like working with common denominators, and the higher, the better. This, I think, is one of the most challenging tasks ahead. We have, is to prove that consensus does not come at the expense of our level of ambition. Again, I think everything is changed. Everything is changing. Everything has changed. We said at the beginning, is the world, is Europe, is the way to do foreign policy. I think in Brussels there is something important happening, something important that we are trying to shape. And as a national diplomat, as an official, as somebody who likes his work, I want to say that I'm very proud to be a little part of this experiment. So I would close it here, and I'm happy to take questions. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Gentilini. Thank you also for taking us into the difficult job of setting up diplomatic service while the world is changing so rapidly. It must be everybody who has moved around or tried to even refurbish their own house see the difficulties, and then not imagining building a new building, etc. But kind of moving a bit from the details, the technicalities, could I challenge you a bit to reflect a bit more on some of the larger issues? Now Europe is around 500 million people. It's the biggest economy in the world, if you put it together. It's the biggest donator in development aid. And I was also told that it's the region that won the most Olympic gold medals.
This is Timothy Gaston.
And we're living in a world where Asia is rising, and Europe is somewhat in a decline. Or at least some put it that's in a decline. So, if you move away a bit from the technicalities and the small things, but where would Europe's foreign policy go somehow? Where should Europe go? Where would you expect it to go? And what do you expect, based upon your experience, what would China, US, etc., expect from Europe? Could you say a few more things about those more broader, general issues?
Yes, sure. I mean, it's not just that I wanted to talk about technicalities. I was just trying to say that setting up something from scratch, it's a difficult job, and you have to start with the basic. And when you start building a machine, which is complex like this, there are many things you have to look at. I said that one of our priorities is to improve our strategic relationship with partners around the world. I said that Asia is very much a focus. I see demand of Europe around the world. What does it mean? I think it means demand for the basic things which have been at the basis of our project. So it's not a question of exporting our models. It's a question to see whether there are areas in the world when we can apply in the same successful way some of the recipe that we have applied within our continent. Again, to quote the same journalist, in a world of giants, I think he said, you better be prepared to be a giant yourself. And that's why I think 500 million of people, as I said, is a good dimension to be a player in today's world. I think that's maybe what I would say.
Okay, thank you. One question over there. Please indicate.
Bård Bredrup Knudsen. With the end of the Cold War, new democracies in former Eastern Europe got one basically catchphrase, and that was full Euro-Atlantic integration, which meant NATO membership and EU membership. And in a number of countries, that's still a driving political catchword domestically. Now, both organizations, NATO and the EU, had requirements, conditionality for membership. But still, there was a primacy of politics. So both NATO and the EU, in my view, opened for membership for countries that were halfway through reform process. The underlying assumption being that once these countries were inside, both NATO and the EU would be able to push the reform process further, and that these countries would then strive for the highest standards of their partners within the organization. Well, that was a false assumption. What we have seen is that the reform process in many of these countries stopped. Actually, it was reversed in some countries. And we still have a deficiency in terms of corruption, rule of law, and good democratic governance. It's not sufficient to have modern legislation on paper if it's not implemented in practice. And in many countries in Europe today, there is a big gap between paper and implementation, and especially in several new member states. What we have also seen is that this poses a threat to EU cohesion. And the current crisis is a good example. So my question is, what will the EU do to relaunch the necessary reform process so that all of its member states live up to the standards that are there on paper, but not really in practice? Thank you.
Thanks. I think it's a very pertinent question. It's a very good question. First, maybe I want to say that we are all aware of the moral obligation after the Cold War, as you said, to reunite the continent. And I see this enlargement policy as in a way a continuation of that project, reunification of the continent. If there is a difference between previous waves of enlargement and future waves of enlargement, talking about the Balkans, for instance, I think the difference is exactly here, the difference is that maybe at some point in the past, you were given the possibility to adjust yourself internally, to complete your reforms once you had joined. I think the process now is more strict. The process now is more based on the conditionality you mentioned, and you have to be almost perfect before getting into there and joining. I think this is one of the lessons, and I see this in our approach to all the countries of the Western Balkans, for instance. Again, conditionality is there. At the end, still it remains based on a trade-off, reforms against integration, but you really have to do what is needed to move the agenda forward. The enlargement process, in my view, it has become, in a way, more individual. In the past, there was very much this idea of the regional approach to a certain area, which is still there, because, of course, it is important to keep the regional approach, but individual merits are going to be more and more important for completing successfully future waves of enlargement. And I think we have recent cases, Croatia and also Montenegro, with which we have open accession talks in the last couple of months. This shown that to move on, you really need to comply. And that's from the EU point of view.
Okay, thank you. And then there's over here, the blue sweater.
Well, you mentioned the European battle groups, which are active as of now, but what do you think of the idea of a common European army?
Sorry, common European?
Army.
Common European army, which is being discussed in Brussels right now.
As I said, this was already, let's say, after Maastricht, one of the new dimension of the European foreign policy. And in my view, I mean, again, talking about an area I know, the Balkans, there was a point which was very crucial in changing the opinion on these kind of things, which was 99, which was after the bombing of Serbia. The UN had started to run Kosovo. NATO had sent 45,000 troops into Kosovo. At the same point, the European ministers were meeting in Köln, in Germany, and they were discussing European defense policy. And it was at that time that this kind of ideas of putting missions prepared to help security came out. That time, these headline goals had developed. This is certainly an issue being discussed. I don't think there is any question on the fact that we want to be more active and we want to be more present in certain areas. This is, again, one of the issues when we have to realize that the EU, which is also the case of NATO, has not its own resources. We rely on member states. Whatever we do, we have to get resources from them. So it means we have to have the consensus, but also means that we have to have the means and the tools. And I think reality shows that sometimes it's very difficult to keep on promising on this, because to move on, you need resources, and you need tools from the member states. But this is certainly a debate going on. There are different views, there are different ideas, but this is really a step which would go in that direction I was mentioning before. EU more and more as a security provider, as a peace builder, and in many areas of the world.
Okay, over here.
Thank you. I'm Hans Borchgrevink from the Research Council of Norway. I take part in the Steering Group for Human Resource and Mobility under ERAC, and also in the SWIC India group. And I was just wondering, to what extent does EEAS do or plan to use research as a kind of door opener for political reasons? And would there be a tighter connection in the days to come than we have sort of experienced so far in these groups?
But definitely it is important to get connected with the research, with the researchers. We have a strategic department as well, which is developing links with various bodies, organizations. So I think this is clearly an area where we are interested in getting as close as possible to the outside world. As I said, our concept is openness. Our concept is to get in touch with the reality, with the people. So I think there is certainly an interest more and more in developing close links with the research center, with people doing this and providing us with expertise, ideas, and all that.
Okay.
I'm Nina Greger of NUPI. Thank you for your introduction. It was really interesting. And you described the EEAS as a network amidst other international actors and international organizations. And I have a question about the EU's cooperation with other organizations, and I'm talking about NATO. As you are aware, of course, the formal cooperation between EU and NATO is in a political stalemate because of the political conflict between Turkey and Cyprus in particular. And I was wondering, as being director for Western Europe, Western Balkans and Turkey, if you could say something about how the EEAS works in order to accommodate Turkish demands or interests in being more closely involved in decision shaping as far as possible as a non-EU country, and in getting an administrative arrangement with the EDA. Because as I see it, Turkey is now becoming more and more important to Europe and to also more global security. So if you could say something about that. And then secondly, if I may, could you pick up on what our foreign minister said about the prospects for the EU to become stronger on the world stage? I mean, the EEAS and the EU is struggling in order to get its framework in place and to make it work efficiently. Do you have the time? Or when do you think that the EU could play a stronger role on the international scene? Thank you.
Thanks. On EU-NATO, we all know the problems. We all know these two constituencies are very similar, but there is also a couple of important differences. The important thing, in my view, is that on the ground things go well, and that there is a lot of cooperation on the ground and at HQ level as well. I don't think it's a mystery that we meet so regularly with them, and we work very closely on very difficult theater. Kosovo being one of that. I was NATO envoy in Afghanistan, which is another very difficult theater, and I have to tell you that on the ground we did very good things together with the EU, particularly when it comes to these provincial reconstruction teams. Despite the complexity of the institutional setup, I think that in my view is the most important thing, that on the ground the two organizations work together and basically have the same objective and pursue the same goal, which is quite often the case. Take the stage on the international stage, be more prominent in the international world. I think I really like this concept of digesting the Lisbon Treaty, because I think it's what's happening, and I don't think it's good and gives you a complete idea on what the EU can do if you look at various organizations, services, institutions in isolation. As I said, EEAS is part of the network, to realize, I think, the full potential of the EU, you should look at the complete institutional setup. Don't forget that we have within the Commission in Brussels Directorate General for trade, for energy, for enlargement, for home affairs within the Commission. And these are, of course, elements that we have to use to shape this policy and to be more prominent, as you said, on the international scene, using the fact that, as I was saying, Cathy Ashton is also Vice President of the European Commission. But it's a very complex setup, and I think it has potential, and with time that we do that. I liked what the Minister said, the not yet, in his intervention. I think it's a very precise description.
Okay, then there's one over there.
Gunnar Ekeløv Slydal, Norwegian Helsinki Committee. One more question about Turkey. EU keeps to its promises, but how do you see the relationship between Turkey and the EU in the future? It seems that there are some political reluctance to keep the promises, to fulfill the negotiations about full membership.
Yes, as I said, I confirm that yes, we keep the promise. Everybody has to keep his promises if you want to move on. Turkey has been given a European perspective. This is a fact. It is also a fact that there is a particular situation which does not allow negotiations to move on a number of chapters. It is also a fact that I think there is an intense work going on to prepare the ground, to start working on dossiers, and make sure that when the conditions are there, you can move on. But it's a fundamental relationship that we have with Turkey, because Turkey is a partner because of this, because it has a European perspective. It is a regional partner. We are doing a lot of things together in the region. It's a global partner in the G20, so it's an important relationship. Again, I tend to see, as I said, I'm an official. I work on the ground. I'm a person which has been deployed on the ground most of his time. I tend to see always the glass half full rather than half empty, because I tend to see what's happening on the ground. And I think also with Turkey, we do a lot of things in various areas. But you are right. The promises need to be kept.
Okay, I still have a few people on my list.
Yeah. My name is Paul Dietrichsen. Just a question about the unity and the strength of Europe, which is obviously related to
the internal
unity.
the unity,
Okay.
yes, and the strength, which is dependent on agreement and common attitudes in the foreign field, obviously between the European nations. If you have differing views on basic foreign policy issues, of course, Europe's strength will be much weaker. So have you detected in recent years a coming together or a harmonization between views in Europe, which again is very, very relevant for the strength, as you say, also for in the defense field in Europe? Thank you.
Thank you. No, I mean, that's a very fundamental point. As I said before, I mean, we are talking about foreign policy, and foreign policy is based on consensus, which means, very practical, in a meeting of 27, if there is one who doesn't agree, you cannot move on. This is a big weakness. That's obvious. And of course, everything is is done before you get into that situation where you have somebody raising a hand, putting a reservation, to try to manage and go through the common denominator and try to see something which is good for all. But I think we should also again look at the reality of things, not being necessarily obsessed with the idea of consensus. Again, I'm sorry to go back to a region, but that's my region, the region I know best, and this is the Balkans. Kosovo. You know very well that there is a very different position in the EU. We have 22 member states which have recognized Kosovo, and we have 5 member states who do not recognize Kosovo. Well, I can tell you very clearly, and if you travel to Pristina, you will see this immediately, that despite this difference has not prevented us from mobilizing for Kosovo a huge amount of resources. Actually, if you go to Kosovo, you will see displayed on the ground, deployed on the ground, all the various assets we have, from the security side to the development to the economic assistance. Kosovo has actually now a much clearer European perspective than, let's say, 1 or 2 years ago. It has been given a visa roadmap, as all the other countries in the region. It has launched and is conducting the Commission a feasibility study, which is, the first step you have to do to move on and give a stabilization association agreement. Again, sorry, these are maybe technicalities, but what I wanted to say is that the difference in policy, which is a huge difference, some member states recognize, some do not. This has not prevented us to have a very proactive policy, I would say, vis-à-vis Kosovo. Of course, it's not always like this. There are cases where you don't have consensus, you cannot move. Names are very important. High representative. It means that the high representative represents positions. That's the job, to represent something. So if there is a position, which is a common position, you have something to say, let's say. If there is not such position, in theory, you do not. Actually, I think this is not the real truth about this job. I think the real truth about this job and about the EEAS is also trying to get, in fact, to the point when you get a common position on something. So this is, I think, is the continuous struggle in Brussels at all levels, every day, to try to move things forward and to try to find the basis which is good for all. There are also new dynamics. There are also new ideas. Now, so far, foreign policy is based on consensus, and that's it.
Okay, thank you. I still have a few more people on the list. But Gentilini, you are not only the head of the section for Balkans and Turkey, you're also head of the section for the EU's relation to Norway, to Switzerland, to the microstates in Europe, and you are to Switzerland. Maybe I said that, and to the EEA as such. Hopefully, there will be a few more questions, but hopefully you can say a few words about how do you consider the development in these countries. We know that the Council has said that you will make a report on the EU's relationship to the EFTA countries, to Switzerland, and also and you are also doing a work considering your relationship to the microstates. And of course, one of those ideas that have been out there is that you would like to lump these countries somehow together to see whether it could be whether Norway and the microstates, Andorra, Monaco, San Marino, etc., could be brought together into one kind of more consistent. I would like to hear your views on that. But first, Nils Morten. This, yeah.
I didn't ask for the floor, but I could...
Oh, you didn't?
No, I didn't.
Okay, then we have... Oh, sorry.
I could put a technical question to you.
There's a microphone behind you.
Have you now got that famous European telephone number?
And what is it? Excellent. Okay, and then since we're running late into the lunch, maybe we should collect the last question. It's over here.
My name is Tobias Sæther, and I'm a student in the University of Oslo. You mentioned climate change. Are the EU willing to, and what could they do to take a leading role in the process against climate change?
Okay, thank you. So,
yes,
please.
Thanks. First, briefly on the telephone number. The fact is that if you have a lot of actors dealing with something, this can be, of course, a point of weaknesses. But I think it becomes a point of strength if all these actors are saying the same things, if all are well connected and delivering the same messages. There are various numbers, if you want to call Brussels, but certainly when it comes to foreign policy, now we have a better number than in the past. But again, and this goes with we were saying at the very beginning, being a network, I think it's a point of strength. It's not a weaknesses. And if you can mobilize more people behind the same objective, I think this is a point of strength. But yes, we have a number now in the EEAS. We have clearly a number.
Plus 32 and something.
Yes, it's plus 32 and something else. Yes. On your question, absolutely. I think you said one word which I think is very is to make this relationship more consistent, which means also, in our view, to make the relation with our partners, Switzerland, Norway, microstates, and other, more based on our acquis, the generality of the acquis. I think we liked very much, talking about Norway, the report, the review published at the beginning of this year. I think it rightly highlights the advantages of this relationship, as it has been said. On our end, as you said, we are reviewing ourselves and we are studying ourselves. And this is the way the EU works when it wants to move forward, to take stock, to see what has worked, what has not worked, what can work better. And I think the important thing is doing this together. The white paper has also been mentioned as far as Norway is concerned, and see where the common ground is. Our view is that we want to strengthen this relationship. We want to make it more effective. Our view is also that we have an acquis. Our view is that we are talking about the internal market here in many ways. And for this, you need a certain homogeneity. And this is the same discourse we are having with all. We have to be homogeneous, and the approach to choosing what you want to do and not what to do is not the right approach. But as I said at the beginning, we have a very strong bond with all these countries, actually. And I think this is a good basis to start with. I also want to say that political dialogue is an important element of all that, because at the end it's not just about the market, it's not just about the internal market, but it's about what you can do together in the world. And here I see a trend. I see a developments in many ways that I think we have to move from the right communication into the right coordination, from thinking and saying the same thing to actually do those same things on the ground. And there are many areas that we can do that. Climate change is one of those. The Arctic was mentioned. I think this is certainly something we are interested in, one of those areas where the EU has a huge potential of resources to work on that. And I think there is a lot to do.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and coming to Oslo to attend this conference. Thank you very much. Thanks. So I suggest that we give him an applause.
Thanks.
And then there will be a short lunch. I think sandwiches are